Deep Down Dark tells the story of 33 men trapped underground in a collapsed mine in Chile for 69 days in 2010 before they were rescued. It was a story that gripped the world at the time, and Héctor Tobar tells it in his book, his new book. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
This was a human drama, a technological drama, all kinds of things. What was your way into it?
Well, the miners, even while they were still trapped underground, they were trapped underground for 69 days. On the 67th day, they had a meeting. They decided that they would share collectively the rights to a book. They would tell their story to one writer and to one filmmaker, and I was chosen to be that person.
I mean, it's extraordinary even listening to that now. I mean,
Yes.
while they were still down there,
Right.
they had this idea that they knew the world knew what was happening. The
Right.
story was going to be told, and it would be told collectively.
Well, yeah, they had been trapped initially for 17 days with no contact from the outside world. They were slowly dying, starving to death in the dark.
Yeah.
Then a drill broke through to them, a 4.5-inch drill broke through them, found them. The world saw these images of them trapped, but they still had to spend another 52 days waiting to be rescued. And in those 52 days, they began to get newspapers, television signal. They actually had a television down there, a projector, that they could see themselves being covered on the TV.
Right. I mean, I recall this very well, our nightly coverage of this. We would see images of them, and they were seeing, I guess, that the world was paying attention.
Right, and they knew that they were the most famous miners on Earth. They were still trapped in this mountain that was rumbling, that threatened to kill them still. They were waiting to get out. They were desperate to get out, but they also thought, we might be rich. We might actually have the story the world wants to hear. And so they made this pact underground.
It's still hard to, it's hard to even conceive what they were going through. They told you their stories. Tell us what it was like, what was underground.
Well, it was an extremely traumatic event. It was a psychological torture. Even working there on an ordinary day was tough. You know, the temperature was 90 degrees. They're 2,000 feet underground. They have to get to the mine through the stone highway in the mountain that spirals down to the bottom. It's 98% humidity. Most of them didn't have breakfast on an ordinary day because they would throw it up after a couple of hours of working in these conditions. So the mine collapses. Huge stone crushes the road out. It blocks their way out with a curtain of stone, a guillotine of stone, and they're slowly dying the first 17 days. And it was a very existential, and it became a very spiritual thing because most of the men were fathers, were providers for their family, and they realized that their families might never see them again. They might never be able to provide for their families again, and so they began to pray. And it was a very difficult emotional experience, and that's why many of them still have traumas to this day.
And of course, in a group dynamic like that, under extraordinary stress, things happen.
Exactly.
Right? Leaders aren't leaders. Other people become leaders. The group changes. What struck you about what they went through in that regard?
Well, one of the first things what many of the men wanted to tell me was the man who people think was the leader underground was not the leader. Luis Ursua, he was the shift foreman. He abdicated his responsibility on the second night, and he did not take charge. Many of the men wanted me to know that. The other thing they wanted to tell me, which was their big secret, was that on the first night, several of the men stole some of the food, the emergency supplies. And so they starved a little bit more than they would have, thanks to the desperation of a few men. So those are some of the stories at the very beginning. That was just in the first 24 hours they were trapped, those things happened.
I mean, when you have this many characters and you have this dramatic a story, and they're relying on their memories, different strands must come out, right? Some of them conflicting.
Yes, there were, for example, at one point they counted how many there were, and someone says, we're 33, and someone shouted out, the age of Christ, and then a swear word. Now, there are several men who claimed to be the one who said the age of Christ.
Really?
And I had one person who told me it was Mario Sepulveda. And this person did not like Mario Sepulveda very much. So I knew that that was probably the right answer, that it was Mario Sepulveda, who became famous above ground as Super Mario because he was the narrator of these underground videos. And he really was the dominant figure underground. He runs away with the book, and he'll probably run away with the movie when it comes out next year.
So as the guy sort of pulling together all of these disparate stories, what did you come to feel about human behavior? What did you learn perhaps yourself? You've been a journalist for many years, so you've covered a lot of different types of stories. What did this one bring out?
Well, I think that it really brought out that when you are facing death, the one thing that really keeps you going is love, love for family. It's that desire to provide for your family that leads you to risk your life in the first place in a mine. And it was the desire to see their children again, their grandchildren, to see their wives, to see their girlfriends, to see their parents, that really kept them going. It helped them organize themselves. When they were dying of starvation, they began to have these really long, lucid dreams. It turns out that if you deprive yourself of food for more than a week, you begin to have lucid dreams. And so many of the men independently told me they were having these long dreams. And in those dreams, they were visited by family members.
Well, so as the man who pulled together all these disparate stories into one narrative, what did you come to learn about humans under stress?
Well, I think that what I learned is that when you're facing death, when you come to the end of your life, you reflect on what made you strong, what you gave to life. These men were family men who were down there risking their lives to provide for their families. And it was the best thing about their lives. And so when they started to die of starvation, they reflected on, what kind of father was I? Was I a good father? Was I a bad father? Was I a good husband? Many of them felt they were being punished for what they had done in their surface lives. I drank too much. I did drugs. I'm being punished.
Really?
Many of them began to pray for the first time in their lives since they were kids. One of the miners told me that it was like going to church, and I had never been in church before because they prayed every day at 12 o'clock. And they had this one particular miner who was a pastor. They called him the pastor. He was actually just an evangelical Christian. He would lead prayers every day in which he would recite Bible parables from memory, told the story of Jonah and the whale. And it caused many of the men to reflect on where they were at that moment, where they had been in their lives. To some of them, they felt like they were trapped in the Bible. It felt like they were in a Bible parable.
You know, that daily prayer is also, it reflects the routine to survive.
Yes.
They created a kind of as much normalcy as I suppose they could muster.
Right, they ate every day at noon. They had just 100 packages of cookies for 33 men and a few cans of tuna. So at the beginning, they rationed one spoonful of tuna and one cookie and a little bit of water with some tuna in it, and that was their daily meal. Then they had to make that every 2 days because it started to run out. And so that daily meal would also include these sessions at which they would apologize to each other for what they had done, their transgressions during the day. I'm sorry I yelled at you. I'm sorry I didn't go help with the water. And so it became this, communion every day, and that was part of the routine.
What about the aftermath? How have they coped?
Unfortunately, I think almost every man had his breakdown. Almost every man had his crisis. Because they had been tortured by the mountain. The mountain was like a monster while they were in it that was growling at them for 10 weeks. It left them with this profound trauma. Some of them had it the first 3-4 months. They were shattered. I interviewed many of the men who were trembling when I first spoke to them about what had happened when I went to their homes. Others didn't have their crisis until a year or 2 years later. So I think every man, they really went through something that was uncomparable in human history. In fact, they were trapped longer than anyone in human history. And so it was a very deeply shattering emotional experience.
What about the part of being celebrities in a way?
You're right.
Tragedy and celebrity hits them at the same time.
Right.
They come up, the world is watching, they're famous, and then what? Is there a letdown? Were they expecting to become, to stay famous, to become rich?
Right. When they came out, they knew that they were the most famous miners on Earth. They had been called national heroes even while they were still trapped. Many of them believed they would never have to work again because a certain Chilean millionaire had already given them $10,000 each, which is a king's ransom in Chile for a working man. Many of them believed that from the film and the book they would get rich and never have to work, and it turned out that the money didn't really last very long. They ended up, many of them have to go back into mining. In fact, there are several of the men who went into underground mining months after being rescued. So you can imagine being pulled out of the earth while a world audience watches, and 6 months later, you're just a working stiff again who has to go back underground and work in a mine. And for some of the men who did that, that was a very difficult emotional experience.
All right, the book is Deep Down Dark. Héctor Tobar, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.